All right, welcome back. A couple of announcements before we get going today. Of course, there are announcements from last time. You've got an essay coming up. If you've not begun to have a think about which essay you want to write on, you might want to do that. You will perform better if you give yourself time to think through the issues. What we're asking of you in this upcoming writing task is something we haven't asked of you yet. In all the writing tasks up to this point, you've just been asked to regurgitate in your own way the thoughts others have expressed. That requires critical thinking of a sort, but it doesn't require you to assess. In this essay, you're required to assess. An effective assessment can only happen if you give yourself time enough to digest and think through the issues you're writing about. Also, what you'll find is that you're going to have questions as you begin working on these essays, and you can only make adequate use of your tutors if you've got time to spend with them during consultation hours. If you write this the day before it's due, you're not going to get any feedback from your tutor. They're not required to provide you written feedback on rough drafts due to workload constraints. But what you can do is see them during office hours, explain whatever you're thinking through, and they can help guide you. So if you want to excel on this final writing task, do get started early. All right. Oh, and then the second announcement is next week. No lectures, no tutorials. Okay. So here's where we found ourselves last time. We, first of all, called forth the common sense epistemology that most people subscribe to. Obviously not explicitly. Most people don't explicitly think through questions of knowledge, but implicitly, people think they know a lot of things, and their sources for knowledge are the ones we described before: perception, testimony, memory, introspection, reason, argumentation. And that was the common sense point of view. Now, we want to ask a question, a critical question, a question of assessment. Is the common sense point of view right? Do we know everything we think we do, and are the sources of knowledge really that, sources of knowledge? Right? Is perception really a source of knowledge? Is introspection really a source of knowledge? And so forth. Well, we noticed last time that, well, to begin answering that question well, what we need is a prior grasp of what knowledge is. What is this thing we're asking about? So we got to get an answer to that question on the table. And this is where we ended up. When we began thinking about knowledge, we were led to, or at least I hoped I led you to, the plausible idea that knowledge is justified true belief. That is, you know something if and only if you have a justified true belief in it. All right, now notice what this is. This is an analysis of knowledge. To say that this is an analysis of knowledge is to say that knowledge is nothing more nor anything less than justified true belief. It's like the relationship between being a bachelor and being an unmarried adult male who's eligible for marriage. There's nothing more to being a bachelor, arguably, than that. That's just what it is. Right? There's nothing more nor less to being a bachelor than being an unmarried adult male who's eligible for marriage. Similarly here, that's the thought behind knowledge. Knowledge is nothing more nor less than this. Nothing more, nothing less. So if you know something, then you've got a justified true belief in it. And if you have a justified true belief in something, then you know it. Okay. Are there any questions about this analysis of knowledge before we get going? All right. Counterexamples. So the Gettier counterexamples say this. There's a problem, right? Knowledge is not simply justified true belief. There's more to knowing than having a justified true belief. Now, Gettier's original counterexample it has a few moving parts, and we got to get a handle on the moving parts if you're going to understand the original counterexample. So I'm just going to introduce you to those moving parts first. All right. So let me ask you a question. Do you have justification to believe? All right, so you might think, do you have any reason whatsoever to believe that the fifth oldest grandchild of Ed Silva has more than $10 in his pocket? All right. Now your answer should be no. You've got no reason. Who is this person? Right? You don't know. Much less you don't know how much money they have in their pocket. But we can, I can change things for you. Let me just inform you of two things. First off, I'm the fifth oldest grandchild of Ed Silva. Okay? And let me show you something further. Got more than $10. Woo, whopping 20. Right? Okay? All right, so now let me ask you the question once again. Do you have justification to believe that the fifth oldest grandchild of Ed Silva has more than $10 in his pocket? Now the answer to the question is obviously yes, right? I've transformed your epistemic situation. I mean, not very much, but with regard to this. All right, so you've got now an argument, right? You know Paul has more than $10 in his pocket, right? You just saw that. You know that Paul is the fifth oldest grandchild of Ed Silva. And so now you are able to arrive at this conclusion. The fifth oldest grandchild of Ed Silva has more than $10 in his pocket. Right, this is how I transformed your situation. I gave you evidence for thinking I have more than $10 in my pocket, and I gave you evidence for thinking I'm the named grandchild. All right. Now, this is just an example of gaining justification by way of an argument. And a presupposition of this way of gaining justification, sometimes this is referred to as inferential justification, because it's justification you acquire by way of making an inference. There's this presupposition here, typically referred to as a closure principle. These closure principles are closely related to what are called also transmission principles in epistemology. This closure principle says this. If you justifiably believe some premises, right, like premise 1 and premise 2, and you logically infer a conclusion from them, and you believe the conclusion on the basis of that inference, then your belief in the conclusion is justified. All right, we want to know how you got justification to believe the conclusion of this argument. Well, this closure principle says why. You've got justification for believing the premises, you inferred the conclusion from the premises, and you believe the conclusion on the basis of that inference. Right? You're not believing the conclusion for some wild reason, like your toes feeling ticklish. Right? If you believe the conclusion because your toe is feeling ticklish, right, you wouldn't have a justified belief in the conclusion. To have a justified belief in the conclusion, you have to be believing the conclusion for the right reason. And here the right reason is that you've got good reason to think the premises are true. And you can see quite easily that they entail the conclusion. Right, notice we can just give endless examples of this. Right? So is this large number a multiple of 7? Right, you've probably not considered this question before. You don't know. Can Pablo swim? Again, who the heck is Pablo? Right, you have no justification. But right, we can very easily get arguments that help us out, right? And thereby acquire justification for the conclusion. And again, what's going on is this assumption about this assumption that's tagged by closure principles. And the tagged assumption is that whenever you got good reason to believe some premises and you infer a conclusion logically from those premises and you believe the conclusion on the basis of that inference, your epistemic situation has been changed. Right? Now it's rational for you to believe. Now you're justified in believing. Now you've got great reason to believe the conclusion. Do you have any questions about this stuff? Gaining justification by way of inferences. All right, good. Then you shouldn't be thrown by our first Gettier case. So here's the scenario, right? This isn't Gettier's scenario. Gettier wrote this in the 60s, well before Breaking Bad. But it's structurally the same. So Walt goes in for an interview. In fact, this doesn't even track the storyline, so but never mind that. Walt goes in for an interview. Walt's in the waiting room. He sees the other interviewee, Gail. Gail's quite nervous. Gail does fidgety things, and among the things he does is he keeps pulling out, emptying his pocket, counting the change, and putting it back. Walt's paying attention. Walt sees that Gail has 10 coins in his pocket. All right, so Gail goes in, gets interviewed, comes out. Walt goes in afterwards, gets interviewed, and at the end of the interview, the boss says, Gail will get the job. Right? Like, sorry, Walt, you're a highly qualified candidate, but I'm giving the job to Gail. Okay. So now Walt has justification to believe Gail will get the job. Walt has justification to believe Gail has 10 coins in his pocket. And from those two premises, Walt can infer, right, because it just logically follows that the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Now, suppose things change. The boss changes his mind and decides to give Walt the job. Now notice that Walt has a justified belief that the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Right? Because the boss told him that Gail will get the job. And when the boss, who has all power over hiring decisions, says something like that, you get good reason to believe that such and so is going to get the job. Similarly, Walt saw Gail counting the coins. He has great reason to believe Gail has 10 coins in his pocket. So he has a justified belief that the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. He's not been told that he's going to get the job. Right? The boss hasn't said he's changed his mind. Just suppose the boss changed his mind in the middle of the night. Okay, just finish the case? Yeah. All right. But suppose that Walt also has 10 coins in his pocket. Is Walt's belief that the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket true? Right? If the boss has changed his mind and is going to hire Walt, and Walt happens to have 10 coins in his pocket, then it's a true belief. The person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. It's not just a true belief, it's a justified true belief. Why is it a justified true belief? Well, it's because Walt satisfied the antecedent of the closure principle. That is, he justifiably believes some premises. He's inferred the conclusion. The person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. He's inferred that from the premises. And he believes it on the basis of his inference. So he has a justified true belief. Okay, can I take your question now? No. Just incidental. It's like he just saw that he had 10 coins in his pocket. He heard he's going to get the job, and he just had the thought, no, the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Yeah. So now let me ask you this question. Do you think Walt has knowledge? Does Walt know that the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket? Why don't you turn to the person nearest to you? Share your thoughts. Does Walt have knowledge? All right. So let's just see, show of hands, who feels like Walt lacks knowledge? All right, most of you. And the remainders, do you feel like he has knowledge? Walt knows that the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket? Here's a reason to feel uncomfortable with that. Right, Walt believes, why does Walt believe that the person who has 10 coins in his pocket will get the job? Because he believes, falsely, that Gale will get the job. And he believes that Gale has 10 coins in his pocket. I was right that Gale has 10 coins in his pocket. So when he has the thought the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket, that's just a different way of having a thought, Gale will get the job. But does Walt know that Gale will get the job? No, he can't. Why? Why can't Walt know that Gale will get the job? Yeah, Gale's not getting the job. Knowledge is factive. If you know P, then P is true. If Walt knows that Gale will get the job, then Gale will get the job. But it's a part of this case that Gale's not getting the job. Walt's getting the job. So what do we have on our hands? We've got Walt, who has a justified true belief, but he does not have knowledge. So if you can have a justified true belief and fail to have knowledge, you can't say knowledge is justified true belief. Because if knowledge is justified true belief, then every time you have a justified true belief, you have knowledge. So there's more to knowing than having a justified true belief. Okay. So let me test you on this last point. The traditional account says you know that P if and only if you have a justified true belief, that P. Right, there are two parts to this if and only if claim. Whenever we make an if and only if claim, we're saying two things. So in this instance, part one, if S knows that P, then S has a justified true belief. Part two, if S has a justified true belief, then S has knowledge. Which part of this JTB analysis does the Gettier counterexample threaten? Yeah, part two. Good. So notice the argument isn't that justified true belief is not necessary for knowledge. That's not the point of the counterexample. The point of the counterexample is that it's not sufficient for knowledge. It's not enough. Right? And part two says justified true belief is enough. So the problem is with part two. All right. So Walt, he's got this argument going, right? Gale will get the job. Gale has 10 coins in his pocket. So the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Walt's belief in the conclusion that the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket is based on these premises. What's the first thing you notice about these premises? How do they differ? They're both justified. They're both believed. Still, there's an important difference. Yeah, only one of them's true. Or more specifically, or alternatively, one's false. Right? Which one's false? Well, the one that says Gail will get the job. So here's a thought. So we've been given a counterexample to the thesis that knowledge is justified true belief. All right, we've got this case. So what we want to do is draw a circle around all the cases of justified true belief that are knowledge, that avoid this kind of problem. And so here's an initial thought. This is Harman's thought. What goes wrong is that Walt's belief that the person will get the job, has 10 coins in his pocket, is based on a false belief. So one way of having an account of knowledge that avoids this particular Gettier counterexample is to say knowledge is justified true belief plus something else. And that something else is not believing what you do on the basis of something false. Right? So the idea is that knowledge can't be based on false beliefs. This is where things go wrong with Walt. And so knowledge is justified true belief that isn't based on a false belief. Okay. Well, let's continue thinking about cases. All right. Painted donkeys. You're traveling through a region of the country where donkeys are regularly cleverly disguised to look like zebras. If you don't think this image accurately represents a clever disguise, just use your imagination. All right, so donkeys regularly disguised to look like zebras. You don't know this. While driving along, you happen to see the single real zebra in the whole region. And when you see it, you form the belief, that's a zebra. All right. So here's one question. Is your belief that that's a zebra based on a false belief? And do you have knowledge? All right, so you're driving along. There's this fact about the region you're in. Lots of donkeys masquerading as zebras. You don't know this, right? You look out the window, and what you see is actually a zebra, the one real zebra in the whole region. And you believe, a zebra. That's a zebra. And you keep driving. Right. Do you have knowledge? Do you know that that's a zebra? So let's tackle that question first. Just show of hands, what's your gut reaction? Are you inclined to think that you have knowledge in this case? So do you think you know that that's a zebra in this kind of scenario? Would you just raise your hand if you think?
When you see the real zebra, is that after you've seen the masquerading donkeys?
No, you don't see any masquerading donkeys. You just see the one real zebra. Yeah, so you're exceptionally lucky. If you were anywhere else at any other point in time, you'd be seeing a fake, and you'd end up with a false belief. But here's a case where you end up with a belief. You end up with a justified belief, because perception is a great reason for belief. And it's a true belief, so it's a justified true belief. So some of you said yes to knowledge. Some of you, or the remainder of you, saying no. So if you think this is not a case of knowing, would you raise your hand? Some others? All right. So looks like it's 60-40-ish. There is a non-trivial amount of disagreement about this kind of case as to whether or not it's a case of knowledge. Let me ask this other question. Can you see that your belief that it's a zebra is not based on a false belief? Right? Notice how this is different from the case of Walt. Walt's making an explicit inference. He has this belief, Gail will get the job. He has this other belief, Gail has 10 coins in his pocket, and he makes this inference. The person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. That's not what's going on in the zebra case. In this zebra case, you just have a visual experience, and you form a belief about how things are just based on the perceptual experience. Right, so an assumption in the background here is that perceptual experiences are not beliefs. And this is a very common, reasonably uncontroversial assumption. Right? There's how things visually seem to you, and there's how you believe things to be. And perceptual experiences need not, you don't have to believe what your perceptual experiences represent. Right? You can be seeming to see chairs and not believe that there are chairs. So this is a case where you've got a justified true belief that's not based on any false belief. It's a justified true belief that's based on a perceptual experience. Okay. All right. Well, let's see if we could change the scenario a little bit. All right, the reason there's a little bit of disagreement about this is because people feel like, oh, if you're actually seeing a zebra, it doesn't matter if you get lucky and see the one real one in the region. The fact that you're seeing the one real one is enough for knowledge. Okay, fair enough. So maybe this is a case of knowledge. Right? There's disagreement, but let's just massage the case a little. Well, let's just shift cases a little bit to keep things clear. Sheep case. Here's the scenario. You're driving through the country. You see a fluffy animal in the field that looks very, 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 very sheep-like. Now, where you're looking is, on a hill, and there's a sheepdog. And the fluffy thing, is at a distance on the hill. And on the other side of the hill, there are, in fact, sheep. You don't see them, though, right? You see the very, very sheep-like fluffy thing on your side of the hill. So you form the belief, because it's a very, very sheep-like thing. There's sheep in the field, or there's at least a sheep in the field. Do you know that a sheep is in the field? All right, let's just see where we're at. Would you raise your hands if you feel like you have knowledge that a sheep is in the field? Would you raise your hand if you feel like there's no knowledge here? All right, majority of you? Yep. This is a widely agreed on case of non-knowledge. You get lucky, right? You don't see the sheep. You just see a fluffy sheep-like thing. But nevertheless, you have a justified true belief because it looks very much like a sheep. Sheep are typically in fields in the region you're at, let's assume. And you're right. It's a true belief, right? So you have a justified true belief, not knowledge. Is your belief based on any false belief? No, this is like the zebra case. You have a perceptual experience of a sheep-like thing, and you form a belief that that's a sheep. You're not doing what Walt did, forming a belief on the basis of other beliefs by way of a logical inference. You're just using your perceptual experience. All right, so justified true belief, no knowledge. Okay. Here's another challenge with the idea that knowledge is just a true belief that isn't based on false beliefs. All right, so Walt made a particular kind of argument in the original case. It was a deductively valid argument. Remember deductive validity? It's impossible for the premises to be true and the conclusion false. What was Walt's argument? Gail will get the job. Gail has 10 coins in his pocket. Those two propositions cannot be true if it's false that the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Right? If the premises are true, the conclusion has to be true. Walt did not have to use a deductive argument. He could have used an inductive argument, like this. It's very, very likely that Gail will get the job. Gail has 10 coins in his pocket. So the person who will get the job has 10 coins in his pocket. Now this is a good argument. Right? This is an inductively valid argument. Are there any false beliefs here? Are there any false beliefs? Why isn't there a false belief? Yeah. Just because something is exceptionally likely to happen doesn't mean that it will. So something can be virtually probabilistically certain, 99.999 and on, and still not happen. There's no false belief here, and yet still we don't share the thought that Walt has knowledge. Right? So he's using an argument, a different kind of argument. It gives him a belief, justified true belief, but not one that's based on anything false. So we have another counterexample to the idea that knowledge just is justified true belief. Okay. Now here's a slightly different case that puts pressure on Harman's thesis, but it puts a different kind of pressure on Harman's thesis. So let me draw your attention to the case, and then we'll think about what its significance is. So here's a case. So Hans brings 100 copies of his handout to the talk, right? Hans is giving a lecture. The room's full, or near enough. He wonders whether he not have brought enough copies for everyone. He does a careful head count, concludes there are 53 attendees, and infers that his 100 copies are enough. But his head count is wrong. There are only 52 attendees. One person, Franz, unobtrusively switched seats, got counted twice. All right. Does Hans know that he brought enough copies? All right, so why don't you address this question? Why don't you turn to the person nearest to you? Maybe you could shift a bit. Is this a case of knowledge? Do you guys want to just shift seats a little so you can share your thoughts? Yeah. All right. So Harman says, to the question, what is knowledge? Knowledge is justified true belief that isn't based on any false belief. All right, so now we've got this case in hand. The first question is Hans's belief that he has enough copies based on any false belief. Why does he believe he has enough copies? Good, yeah. He knows he has 100 copies, and he's counted 53 people. Right, so he's got an argument. Right? Or he's done a head count, and he's ended up with 53. Is there a false belief in the mix? Yeah, there's a false belief in the mix. There's only 52 people. So he's got a justified true belief that's based on something false, namely the false belief that there are 53 people in the room. Does he have knowledge, though? Does he know that he has enough copies? What do you think? So why don't you raise your hand if you're inclined to think? If your gut reaction is, yeah, he knows he has enough copies. All right, yeah, most of you? Good, good. So here's interesting. This is not at all like the earlier Gettier cases we've seen. All the earlier Gettier cases show that you can have justified true belief and not have knowledge. This is a case that shows that you can have justified true belief that is in fact based on something false and still have knowledge. In other words, knowledge is compatible with believing things on the basis of false beliefs. That's kind of interesting. That's kind of interesting. Besides just being generally interesting, it shows that Harman's solution not only has its own counterexamples, the sheep case, the zebra case, the revised Walt case. Right, so those are all cases where you have a justified true belief that's not based on anything false and lack knowledge. Here's a case where you have knowledge, and it is based on a false belief. Right, so Harman's supposed solution, which does a nice job with the initial Gettier case, isn't plausible. Right? This can't be the correct account of knowledge. Now, we've seen a handful of Gettier cases to this point, right? We see the original Walt case, we've seen the zebra case, the sheep case, and the inductive Walt case. So what we want to ask is, well, what do all these cases have in common? Right? Because we know that justified true belief is necessary for knowledge. You never have knowledge if you lack a justified true belief. But sometimes you have a justified true belief, and that's not enough for knowledge. Right? That's what these cases show us. So what are the range of cases where you have a justified true belief and you do have knowledge? Right? We want to draw a circle around the knowledge cases of justified true belief that excludes, obviously, all the non-knowledge cases of justified true belief. Right? We want an adequate, counterexample-free account of what knowledge is. So one way of beginning to address this question is to think about what all these Gettier cases have in common. How are they alike? And then we construct a condition for knowledge on the basis of what all these problem cases have in common. All right, so what do all these problem cases have in common? Right, how are they related? Well, one way in which they might be related can have something to do with the source of justification in play. So in each of these cases, you end up with a justified true belief. There's some source of justification then, right? You don't have justification without a source of justification. So where's the justification coming from in the sheep case? Yeah, perceptual experience. Good. Where's the justification coming from in the zebra case? Yeah, same place, right? No difference there. What about the Walt cases, the original and the inductive version? How are those different? Well, arguments are in play, right? In both those cases, there are arguments. One's inductive, one's deductive. For arguments to give you justification for their conclusion, the premises have to be justified. How are the premises justified in those arguments? Why does Walt believe Gale has 10 coins in his pocket? He saw Gale counting his coins. So perception's playing a role. Now, it's not just perception that's playing a role in generating justification in the Walt case. Right? Testimony too, right? Part of the reason Walt believes Gale will get the job is because the boss, who makes hiring decisions, seems to honestly say Gail will get the job. So testimony is in the mix. But let's just focus on the perception bit. What we have in all these cases is a source of justification that involves perception. Right. Now, let's ask a question. What's going on with perception? Is there anything there that might... is there anything about perception that we might want to say is incompatible with knowledge? Now, one thing you might think is that, well, part of the problem with all these cases is that people are relying on fallible sources of justification. Right? Perception, testimony, inductive inference. These are all sources of justification that can get things wrong, that can mislead you. Right? You can't be 100% certain if you're basing your beliefs on a perceptual experience, because your perceptual experiences can mislead you. It can look like there's a magpie over there, but it could be one of those smaller magpie-looking birds. Right? Visual experiences can mislead. Maybe you Australians aren't going to make that kind of mistake, but me, coming here not so long ago, I didn't know the difference. So I saw black and white birds and thought, magpie. Right? Turns out I was wrong with all the small ones. So here's the thought. Maybe the way to avoid Gettier problems is to impose a further constraint on the source of justification, on the kind of evidence that's suitable for knowledge. What kind of evidence? Well, only evidence that could not be misleading. Right? So this infallibility requirement. You know something, in other words, only if your justification is not possibly misleading. All right, so you get a different theory of knowledge here. If you want to name it for it, call it the infallibility justified true belief account. You know P if and only if you truly believe P, and your justification for believing P guarantees the truth of it. All right, so this is a theory of knowledge that's going to be somewhat familiar to you, right? You haven't been explicitly introduced to it yet, but it's implicit in what you've already read with regard to Descartes. Descartes was really worried that he didn't know things because he could just very easily conceive of himself being misled. So a thought that emerges from Descartes' reflections is that to know something, your justification for believing it can't possibly be misleading you. Right? Your justification has to guarantee the truth of what you believe. This gets you out of all the Gettier cases, right? This theory of knowledge does not say you know that Walt knows, that you know in the sheep case, that you know in the zebra case, that you know in the inductive Walt case. Because in all those cases, your source of justification is fallible, right? It is misleading. It can be misleading. So this theory of knowledge doesn't say you have knowledge in any of those cases. And that's good, because in all those cases, it seemed like you didn't really have knowledge. Right? That's why there are counterexamples to the JTB account, the original account. So that's good. This is an account of knowledge that satisfies our initial criteria, that justification, truth, and belief are necessary components to knowledge. Right? This says they're necessary. You never have knowledge unless you have a justified true belief. And it adds something further that gets you out of all the earlier Gettier cases. Right? It says your source of justification can't possibly be misleading. All right? So that does a lot of what we want out of a theory of knowledge. But is it adequate? Right? Or does this account face any problems of its own? So obviously, the big addition in this account of knowledge is that you know something only if your justification is not possibly misleading. Well, let's think for a second. Suppose this is true. Suppose this infallibility requirement is in fact correct. You only know when your source of justification entails you're correct. Guarantees truth. All right, what can you know? How this? Think about whatever you had for breakfast this morning. Suppose it's cereal. Right? Can you know, according to this condition, that you had cereal for breakfast this morning? All right, according to this condition, you know that you had cereal for breakfast this morning only if your source of justification could not be misleading you. What's your source of justification for thinking you had breakfast this morning? Right? You remember, or you seem to remember, rather. Can you be mistaken with regard to what you seem to remember? Yeah, really easily. So what does this say about whether or not you know that you had breakfast this morning? You don't know. Right? It says you don't know. Is that a problem? Well, yeah. Surely you know whether or not you had breakfast this morning. Do you know that you entered this room less than 10 hours ago? Yeah, of course you know that you entered this room less than. Right, you didn't sleep here last night. The doors were certainly locked. But again, what are you relying on for that knowledge? Right, memory. But memory can be misleading. What survives this condition? What in the world can you know? Can you know that where your car is parked? Can you know what your childhood door looks like? The front door in the home you grew up in. Can you know that water is H2O? Can you know that rain is often accompanied by clouds? Is it not quite easy to see how your evidence could be misleading? Right? I mean, you could be in the matrix, and if you were in the matrix, right, you'd be having all the sorts of perceptual experiences that you actually have, but they would be completely misleading. When you're in the matrix and you see clouds and rain, there are no clouds, there is no rain. Right? You're just in a tub of jelly, right, hooked up to a machine. Right, when someone gives you a high five in the matrix, you've not made physical contact with anyone. Right? It just, you have a perceptual experience as though you made contact with someone. It's very easy to see how your evidence can be misleading. And so what happens if you opt for this theory of knowledge, all of a sudden, a lot of knowledge disappears. And that's a real challenge for this account. Even though it avoids all the Gettier cases we discussed, it has some other bad implication. Namely, you know a whole lot less than you actually do. That's a problem. All right, so we need to keep searching. We need to look elsewhere for an adequate account of knowledge. Knowledge involves justified true belief, but it involves something more. It's not justified true belief that's not based on anything false, right? That has its own problems. And it's not justified true belief where your source of justification guarantees truth, right? That's just way too strong. So we need something in the middle. That's what we're going to pick up with next time. Remember, not next week, the following week. Right? You got spring break.
Sorry, I'm just working out the lots there. You guys are here for human rights theory? Yep. Okay, I'm filling in today. Tell me, is that too dark to read? Can you see what you're looking at, if you need to? Okay. Just, I want to show a video, so in terms of being clear.
You are a